And we are live for Deep in the Bush. Joining me today is Mario Rigby. Mario is an adventurer, an explorer, an occasional model. Am I allowed to say that? Is that right?
I mean, go for it.
Been a fitness trainer. He's been a professional athlete. Been a man of. He's basically been the man that most men wish they were. Mario, fantastic to have you here today. I'm going to start off with probably the toughest question of the day, and this is really going to pin you down on this. Yep. Caribbean or Caribbean?
We like to say Caribbean.
Fantastic. I've been getting it right. Okay. I was asking that because you are originally from Turks and Caicos, the Turks and Caicos island chain. It's a place I admit I knew little about. Somebody once, when I was living in Botswana, said to me, "Oh, Botswana, that's one of those countries you see at the Olympics." And you say, "I haven't heard of that one before." And then 4 years later, you say it again. Anybody else who's in the dark about Turks and Caicos, what's a couple of things that they should know?
I mean, besides the obvious that it's one of the nicest beaches on the planet, because we're surrounded by, I think, the second largest coral reef system in the Western Hemisphere. And so that means that we are like an oasis for teeming of like just beautiful sea life that come to our shores. We have the humpback whales, all the other whales. We have dolphins. It's just one of the most diverse ecosystems when it comes to marine life. But on top of all of that too, it's like a luxury island kind of escape, where celebrities have really found refuge to hang out there. We have people like Drake, Kim Kardashian, Jennifer Lopez is there right now. She has a lot of selfies on the beach. So it's a really good place to go, because also the culture and the island life there is so relaxed, so chill. We don't necessarily care if you're a celebrity or not. You can hang out. You can actually go downtown, hang out, and nobody would even really, maybe a few people will ask for photos, but it's not like a big deal.
Yeah.
Because we're used to having that. And I think it's our attitude, which is we're all one people, and we all kind of see each other equally. Another thing I think a lot of people would need to know that as well is it's one of the first islands that Christopher Columbus had founded when he went over to the other side of the world when he was looking for India.
Okay.
And he crashed, and there's debate on which specific island he crashed on, that he first landed on. But it's between the Bahamas and Turks and Caicos. And the island that I was born in, which is Grand Turk, one of the chain of islands in the Turks and Caicos Islands, is where he actually set refuge.
Okay, wow. It's interesting. I mean, having been an explorer, or as an explorer yourself, you realize how many discoveries are. It's the things you trip over, crash into. There's very rarely, there's always he discovered the source of the Nile. So he's looking for something else, but that's what he tripped over in the end.
That's it, yeah.
Yeah, so again, it's silly. Columbus didn't discover these islands, he crashed into them.
He crashed into them, and he single-handedly also started the whole slave trade that happened between the West and the East,
Yeah, which is, of course, a horrific legacy.
Oh, yeah, for sure. 100%.
Yeah, I mean, we're just talking about Tanzania offline for a moment there. I spent time in Angola about a year ago and finding out the links between this slave trade and the movement across the continent. And
it's incredible.
It's a new spin on what, for me, has been Africa as a wildlife destination, the history of it. Both uplifting and horrible. Yeah,
it's quite rich. And have you been to the Zanzibar, the slave chambers there? Did you visit there? Oh my goodness! It is just it's just so appalling to see how the slaves were treated back in the day. They had these like small concrete chambers, and Zanzibar used to have a river that ran through the. It was like a man-made river, so it was like a canal that ran through Stone Town in the downtown region. And during floods, what they would do is they would just allow the flood to come into those chambers, and it would drown the bottom half of the slaves that lived in these super tiny little cabins that were filled with 70 people. It's incredible. It's just so bad, and it's still there today. Like there's still evidence of it.
I think the scope of the slave trade is something which I think people are only becoming more aware of in recent years, as it is being brought to prominence, and it's perhaps because history's been told from such a European perspective. I mean, even I made the casual error just a moment ago of talking of somebody discovering the source of the Nile. There are plenty of people living around there, and Columbus didn't discover the Turks and Caicos.
Right.
These inhabited islands.
Yeah. That's why I used the word not discover, but I said when he first landed.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And it's, I think a hangover from my education that could be well beaten out of me. Now, the reason you know about Zanzibar, the reason you know about Africa is you embarked on a quite extraordinary adventure, self-powered. Like all of your adventures so far, they're all self-powered. That's correct, isn't it?
Yeah, so far they've all been human-powered.
Human-powered, which I absolutely love and want to come back to. But you walked from Cape Town to Cairo, which is, it's one of those things, it's often spoken of, and you often hear of the attempts, but very few people actually succeed with because of, for a thousand different reasons, often politics getting in the way. Yeah. So the question regarding that is, why?
I mean, we could go far back into history and whatnot, but I'd like to condense that history just for the sake of your listeners. But I would say that it started with my mother, who's a very adventurous person. She was one of the first women in Turks and Caicos on the islands to essentially leave a conventional marriage to look for greener pastures on the other side. And so she did that, and that happened to be my stepfather, who is German. And so I was able to move to Germany at a young age before I could speak. And I guess that's kind of where I would say adventure started, was the audacity of my mom's willingness to go above and beyond, and not allow society to tell her like this is how it needs to be. And so I guess she's always instilled that kind of in me growing up. And I would say that throughout my life leading up to until I was 29, I was constantly trying to figure out like, how do I become a prominent citizen? How do I like become valuable? And that has a lot to do with me being bullied in school and wanting to show my worth. So I really like tried hard to prove to people like, look, I can be loved, which is, it sounds sad.
No.
But we all have that slightly in us at some capacity. And for me, that was my driving force to become talented at whatever it is that I wanted to set out to become. And so that's where track and field came to place. And, I ended up competing for my country, Turks and Caicos, and got to compete internationally. So that never really fruitioned till the very end, which was for me to compete in the Olympics at the highest possible level, in the 400 meters. At that time, I was actually competing with the likes of Usain Bolt and all those guys before they were even famous. We were competing against each other, neck to neck. Obviously, he would always be winning, and I'd be like, my goodness, this guy was a phenom since the beginning of time. And, when those things didn't really work out and I just kept trying to reach for the stars, I just kept falling back down. And I thought to myself, like, whoa, like, I have nothing else to live for, and then so I just started to go into auto mode, which is, okay, I'm going to try this 9-to-5 normal life, and that only lasted for a very short time, because I started to realize that, I keep getting fired or I keep quitting because I just couldn't take someone telling me what to do unless there is a purpose or a reason behind it. And, they failed to do that. They were just like, just do your job, have your head down, just listen to me. And I it's just, it's just something that I couldn't do. And I'm not saying that it's good for everyone to do what I did. It's just that for me personally, from who I think I am and what I know works for me, that didn't work for me. So I was going through this crossroads where I thought to myself, okay, I should either, continue living this mundane, uneventful, and purposeless life, or I can transition into a life that has full of meaning and purpose. And so I went into this year of full research, diving straight into, well, what is it that I really want to do in life? And I started investigating, and I said, if the ultimate thing that you could do, what one thing would you do? A friend of mine asked me this, and I said, well, I would travel around the world in the most unlikely way and go to some of the most hidden places on the planet, share whatever it is that I found, and share it with the world in the most entertaining possible way that I can. And so it's like a mix of pure exploration, pure adventure, pure discovery, and then also mixing that up with, when I say entertainment, I'm saying like for the viewers to understand and to learn about different cultures in a meaningful way that help bridge the gap between humanity. And so I thought to myself, what is it that I wanted to do? And then I started to look at Africa a lot. And Africa was a huge inspiration of mine because, when I was a kid, me and my brother, we would watch the show The Black Panther. And it was a show where there was an episode in that show where T'Challa, who became the king of Wakanda, apparently, the Black Panther, before he became the king of Wakanda, he decided, I'm going to go on a walkabout in order to learn about the culture, the history, and the beauty, the flora and fauna of Africa. And so he began on this walkabout and really discovered all of these beautiful, places, this oasis in the desert, and these like towns in Cairo, for instance, and saw the pyramids. And then all of a sudden, he got robbed in Cairo. And it was like the most beautiful girl he got robbed from, who ends up actually becoming Storm in the Marvel series. And he fell in love with her. And so he went through all these different experiences. There's a very short clip of that episode in the Black Panther show, but it resonated with me for the rest of my life. And, by the time I turned 29, I thought to myself, well, why can't I just recreate that life? Why can't I just be the real life version?
When you get robbed in Cairo, it's very rarely Halle Berry.
It's very rarely Halle Berry, but I did meet somebody who I would name anonymously here, but probably pretty close.
So you were born in Turks and Caicos. You'd grown up in Germany. You'd moved to Canada, which is where you are right now, and then you said, furthest place from here, Africa.
Yeah, I wanted to see what was life, the most authentic possible way to experience life. Who are the people that make up the majority of the planet? And how are they living? I wanted to get away from this Western bubble of security and constant fear of the outside of the world. I wanted to get outside of this bubble, and I wanted to do it in a way in which I couldn't really escape or run away from troubles that, came to me, or if I walked into them. And I felt like walking for me was probably the best way for me to experience Africa. And so the combination of me wanting to look for an authentic life purpose and having that inspiration from the Black Panther show that I used to watch when I was a kid, and also my philosophical views of the world isn't exactly a dangerous place, but where I was living at the time in downtown Toronto, that's how people viewed it. And so I felt the disconnect between me and the people where I lived at the moment. So I needed to go out. And I thought, if I'm going to go out, I'm going to go all the way out.
Yeah. In retrospect, having done that, where would you say is the most dangerous place?
I would say the most dangerous place, like there are two kinds of scenarios. One, if there is a civil unrest, a conflict, a war, I would say those are very dangerous places. It can become essentially no man's land in a lot of those regions, and anything can happen to you with very little accountability from authorities. So I would say those are probably the most dangerous, I would say. Secondly, places that are very remote and there's very little access to water, food, shelter, well, all those places. So I would say like the desert is an example.
Well, you've just described Sudan, which was the way you went. That is the sticking point for so many people that want to take.
Yeah.
I'm talking people driving it, sometimes even flying over. Sudan is what stops them, and you went through it.
Yeah.
Was that the hardest part of it, or was the hardest part the first step?
I wouldn't say it was the hardest part. I walked with camel herders, so they crossed the desert, and I made it there at the right time. I was actually given a tip by Levison Wood, who is one of Great Britain's great explorers. He walked the length of the Nile from source to finish, and he happened to walk across the White Desert as well. And although his series looked quite dramatic, it didn't necessarily seem that way to me. I think he went off route by for some reason, but I stayed en route, and therefore I was able to finish it much sooner than he did. But there are these camel herders that essentially cross the White Desert. It would take them like a week to cross, and you essentially purchase a camel for a couple of grand USD. And what happens is that camel will carry all your water. It's not a camel that you would sit on or ride on. It's a camel that would carry enough water to carry you from one end of the desert to the other. And essentially you can walk ahead, and by nighttime this thing comes around, you refill, life is good.
Oh, yeah, that's crossing those vast tracts of desert. I've spent a lot of time in the deserts of Namibia and Botswana, and you can see they're daunting just looking at it. And the word awesome gets overused. But in these big open deserts is where you actually feel awe, isn't it? The stars at night, and I
remember the first time I actually went out into the desert, I cried. I was just like, wow, it's so beautiful. It is just it's so unreal. It's unlike anything you've ever seen before. And it's just the amount of emptiness is just you haven't seen anything like that before. So it's hard to fathom, and your mind is just like, trying to grasp the enormity of it all.
I actually love it when you get I spent a lot of time, particularly in Namibia, where you have this huge Namib desert. I'll take people out into that, and it's impossible not to feel small. You are so strongly reminded of you're tiny.
Yeah.
Your problems are tiny. The things you think you're small, you're insignificant, and history is going to forget you like this. And so many people actually love that, because it does mean their own problems. It's like they put in perspective. But you can, particularly guys who are like, no, I'm a big man. I'm something. They hate it. So I'm glad to hear you cried. I think that's the healthy reaction, is just to go, what a relief. What a relief.
I think so. Yeah. You can't fight against a system that's beyond you. I mean, the Mother Nature, the cycle of life on Earth is more intelligent than we are. And our problem, I think our Western problem, has been trying to separate man from nature, and or humankind from nature. And that's been the biggest problem that I think we are about to face when the climate crisis is smashed upon us.
I think if we stop patting ourselves on the back for being so intelligent, we might realize we're not.
Exactly. Exactly. And it's okay. It's totally fine. We don't you don't need to we're doing good. We're doing okay.
Yeah. There's a bunch of things we're good at, but there's so many we could be better at, and maybe let's try to use these big brains we got for that. But coming back to your trip, 12,000 kilometers, is that correct?
That's Yeah.
What was the physical toll of that? I mean, it doesn't matter what kind of shape you're in, how many times you've nipped at Usain Bolt's heels. That's gotta have hurt. How were you at the end?
So near the end, I started to like I realized that my knees started buckling in. So actually, my legs went from sprinter legs to like more of an endurance legs.
Right.
In terms of like where the majority of my muscles were in my quads and in my glutes as a sprinter. And I realized that they started to shrink and they started to get weaker over time. And then other muscles started to, more of my endurance muscles started to kick in. But it was kind of transformative in that sense. I realized that if I was walking with an injury, I would like say limp or something like that. But I would realize that because I'm putting so many steps in, we're talking like, 35 to, sometimes 60 kilometers a day. I realized that with that many steps and that many hours, even with a small adjustment, if your knees are buckling in, then they tend to be like that for like weeks on end, even though the injury has subsided. So it was really, I had to make a conscious effort to make sure that like technically I was constantly in I would say biomechanical good shape. So making sure that, my knees aren't buckling in, my toes aren't flaying out, all that, just small little minute details like that.
You're learning to walk.
Sorry?
Learning to walk.
Learning to walk, exactly.
Yeah,
it's a constant, you have to pay attention constantly.
Yeah, no, I can imagine that. And emotionally, physically, the toll, I knew there must be some. Was there an emotional toll from having done it? Or again, was it a feeling of release at the end? What was it like to have finished 12,000 Ks of walking?
It was a very strange ending, actually. I'm not going to lie. It was very odd for me. But just going back to just to quickly the physical attributes. So at the beginning, it was physical nightmare. And then eventually it subsided, and then the walks became quite normal. It just became like a daily like routine, like just waking up in the morning and going for a walk around your house. So it started to feel like that eventually. So it wasn't like a big kicker. I never felt like, oh, I can't do this walk. It was, I would say 90% of the time it was mental. And when you keep mentally having to push yourself every morning and say like, okay, gotta get up, gotta walk. And it's not just the walking or the distance, the time scales are just insane, because sometimes you're doing 12, 13, 14 hours of continuous walking, which eventually can lead to like I feel like some people would probably have psychological problems after that. When you're repeating a movement over and over and over and over and over and over in a single direction. That was one obstacle I had to face. And the other one was, how to navigate through people, especially in complete different tribes and cultures that are completely alien to you. And, I've had to meet hundreds of these different tribes and cultures, some way more intense than others. And, trying to avoid getting arrested and trying to avoid getting shot at. It's just a lot every single day that you have to go through. So by the time I finished, it was like a relief, but at the same time, I was sad that it was done. And I thought to myself, well, what next?
Because I love it. There's something you were saying earlier about you wanted to be in a place where it was basically, if the shit hit the fan, it was you there to take it full spray. And it is, it should be a rite of passage, I think, for not having to walk the length of Africa, but I think every young person, I don't care your gender, should at some point be in a place that there is no email home, there's no WhatsApp to ask for money. You are in this situation and you walked into it, you've got to make sure you get to walk back out. It's a fantastic lesson, and you undertook it, I'm guessing, thousands of times.
Yeah, and I've actually even met a lot of young boys who've done the rite of passage. They've done walkabouts where the Maasai tribe would go out into the bush, learn how to survive. Sometimes they would get the tips of their penises clipped off as well. And in the bush, which is very dangerous because of, obviously, if you're putting metal and cutting it through your skin, that can cause a lot of infections. And there aren't any medical, facilities in remote bushes in certain parts of Africa, particularly in Eastern Africa, when you're going out away from civilization in the sense of urban areas. So, those areas, it really, like, I learned a lot from how people were, and I learned about the calmness of a warrior, right? I learned about how, like, the Maasai warriors was just so strong and so present, but yet they're very calm and gentle, and it really, like, effed up my mind about what it is to be a man. So I had to really unlearn a lot of principles of what is it to be a masculine kind of, I would say, what's that? Type A, not type A, but
alpha male type.
Alpha, that's the one, yeah.
Sprinters have got, there's a lot of that in sprinting, isn't there? Like sprinters, they're bloody fast and they get over there and they act like they've cured cancer. It's like, well done, you're over there.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is, when you're talking about sprinting, right, you're outputting more power, body to weight ratio than any other human being on the planet. They're neck to neck with power lifters, right, in terms of power output. So if you're gonna be the most powerful human being on the planet, I feel like there's gonna be a little bit of like showboating and like celebration at the end, in that sense, even though it's very short. But bravado is something that we've been taught in the Western world is a very dominant male kind of thing, but over there it's not. It's kind of frowned upon, because for them it's being gentle and control, managing your emotions and being calm is actually the lesson. There's a historian, Yuval Harari. I'm not sure.
Oh yeah.
So, amazing guy. He said that basically humanity is like a bunch of scared sheep with nuclear rockets attached to them. And then he says, like, and then we have predators like lions who are very calm, but they've evolved into being predators for so long that the ecosystem has worked with them. But just like the sheep with nuclear rockets attached, we are like them, because we're scared, and we've just very recently got this power to create civilization, to have a frontal lobe that like can cognitively think about scenarios and situations outside of our heads, and so I feel like the Maasai warriors, they understood that. They knew that. They said, with great power comes great responsibilities. And they
Marvel stuff,
right? And they didn't just tell the kids like, oh, you should be nice. No, they trained them to be one with nature. They trained them to be like that. And that's what human beings are. We're essentially this malleable, empty sponge at the beginning, and then you can fill it up with whatever it is that you want. And I think it's our responsibility to fill up our, our new generation of people who are custodians of the planet and who care about humanity.
Yeah, it's, again, coming back to what you were saying, I really liked earlier on when you were talking about yourself, the younger you wanting to put in, be a good example. And I don't know how to do this yet. All I want for my own kids is that they aim to put in more than they take out. And I find that really hard to engender here. I think the bush is an easier place to do it. But maybe if I was out with the Hadzabe or somebody, the Himbas, the more traditional living people, they would say, oh, give me a city and you could teach a kid anything. I don't know. I was with the Hadzabe, it must be 10 days ago. I don't know if you met them in Tanzania.
I don't think so.
They're the ones closely related to the Bushmen of the Kalahari.
Oh, yes, yeah.
Still very much a hunter-gatherer lifestyle. And we went out with a group of hunters, which included a kid. I would guess he was 10 years old. Absolute dead-eye shot with a handmade bow and arrow of his own. At one point, he put it through a dove's neck.
Wow.
And no showboating. He took it
Yeah.
quiet, put it in his belt, because if he did the like that,
right.
the doves would fly away.
Yeah.
So this was business, and it was work, and celebrate at the end as you're eating it. Celebrate with a family.
That's it. Yeah. I think we need to teach these lessons, but it needs to be, and that's the key point, is it needs to be taught. We have to stop thinking like, oh, we're just going to hope for the best. No, you need to make the best. You need to create the best, and that's how it works.
Well, you must have people say to you, "Oh, you're so lucky to have to do the things you've done." Does that bother you when people say that?
It used to bother me, yeah, and I think I have a more like a different philosophical approach to it now, which is when people say luck, it already tells me that that's how they see life, and that's how they see realities. And so I think my job is to try and encourage them to understand that it's not just luck, but an incredible amount of work.
Yes.
It takes effort, it takes work, and it takes sacrifice. And that's something that a lot of people aren't willing to do. And that's why they will call it luck, because they don't want to go through the sacrifices in order to achieve the same things.
I think in the 20-something episodes we've had of this show so far, that's probably the best answer. I love that.
Thank you.
There's a ton of luck at the end of work and sacrifice.
Yeah.
That's what luck is.
That's exactly what it is. Yeah. I'm not trying to like tell people like, oh, if you believe in it, then it'll fruition to reality. Like, I mean, whoever is teaching these things, it's very dangerous teachings, because you're teaching humanity that you deserve to get everything and anything you want. And I don't care about the word deserve. I care more about like, should you have, do you need?
Right. Wow.
So even though you can manifest all these realities, like these books that are out now with all these gurus, to me, they're the same as everyone else. They're trying to make money, and people are buying it because they do want to see themselves doing better in life. However, don't want to go through the long process of what it takes.
Do you remember that book, The Secret, from a few years back?
Oh, boy, yeah, that was intense.
A friend of mine had a secondhand bookstore, and he just had a copy in the front window, and it said, sign above it said, "If any of this bullshit is true, somebody will give me $10,000 for this book."
That's awesome. I love that.
Yeah. So on a slightly more serious note, one of the things you're hoping to achieve with the adventures you undertake, the public speaking that you do, the TV show you've got showing off your homeland of Turks and Caicos, is to inspire Black people of African descent, to get outdoors and stop leaving you out there alone with, like I said, the Trump Golf Day. And in preparation, I was thinking that I lived in Cape Town until recently, and I'd go hiking. And I've got to admit, if I saw a Black person, most time I would tense up a little, because it was unusual. And I just think, why are they here? Whereas if I passed white people, hello, and there wasn't, I was creating the segregation there, but I think it was in part because it was so unusual. Why is that? Maybe not with regards to Cape Town, but why is it and I've been hiking in Eastern and Western United States. I've been hiking through Canada.
Yeah.
Why is the great outdoors the white outdoors?
Well, because it was taken by white people. It was literally, I mean, if you want to get like straight to it, it was literally taken by white people. Right. And that sense, that sensibility is still there. That sensibility of like, we took this land, we own it now, and we're going to secure it. And it's not that long ago. It's not that long ago where slavery was just abolished, and relationship to land was to pluck it and serve the white masters. And, so that's one reason. Okay, there are multiple reasons. So one reason is there's that historical connection between being Black and being on land. Two is, the white colonizers who came and basically took the land and started putting up fences. And so people who are not white, that still looks like get out to us. If that makes any sense.
Yeah. Do you feel
all the rules, like even if there aren't any fences, there are like all these rules and all these different things that you need to do to get to a park, like sign up and whatnot. These aren't things that are like, normal to people outside of the Western culture. I mean, outside of like white Western culture, because it's never really taught in inner city schools. It's never taught in the Caribbean or anything like that. Very few people would know about that. This is where I'm fortunate enough to learn about, you just sign up online and you just like book a ticket. It's just a simple thing like that, but it's not necessarily something that's encouraged in inner cities.
How do you think we get those inner city kids of any ethnicity to feel welcome?
Well, it's first of all just getting them out there, and the effort isn't just enough for me to advertise like, hey, Black people should come outdoors. It should also be people like me actually going to inner city schools, or people who can afford this, and actually take groups of kids out and take them hiking and do show them how you can secure yourself in the outdoors. And that leads to people having confidence. That leads to people, having enjoyment of the real world. When I was raised in Germany, there's this thing called a forest school before you start kindergarten school. Mm-hmm. And forest school, we go out and we play, and it teaches Germans to be confident in the outdoors. That's why you see German travelers are like some of the #1 travelers around the world. Yeah. You'll see them everywhere. It's like in some of the most remote places in the world. And that's because from an early age, from the onset, we are taught that, it's natural for us to be in the outdoors. But in inner cities, we're taught to be afraid of the outdoors. We're taught that this is like a crazy white people thing, which is ridiculous, because in Africa, it's all outdoors for the most part. For the most part, like it's all outdoors. We've forgotten that history, but again, people don't want to be reminded of the history that Black people went through. It's a shameful. People are ashamed of it, and anything that reminds them of it, like being outdoors, having to survive, that sounds like slavery to me, or to them, and to a lot of people. Not everyone, but it's definitely that layer, all those different layers that I'm talking about. And then the grand cherry on top is poverty. Poverty definitely lends a big role. If you're looking for a job to basically pay rent for the cheapest possible condominium or apartment in the inner city, you're not going to be thinking about like, oh, let me go hiking on the weekend. You're thinking about like, holy crap, how do I make more money? Exactly. And the one day that you have off, because you work like 12, 14-hour shifts, you don't want to go out and go hiking or camping. And that would be selfish for you to use that money when your kids or when your neighbors are starving and your family's starving.
Yeah. So it's interesting, because we're talking pretty much about developed Western world here, and yet so much of what you're talking about here in a way reflects also upon the African scenario in terms of conservation, where conservation is really only ever going to be effective once people aren't poor.
Yeah.
You never meet a conservationist who's starving. They've always got a full belly.
Yeah.
And that's because it's very, very hard to start worrying about the rhinos of the world when your kids are crying from hunger.
Absolutely.
I mean, I get that completely. Anybody that doesn't understand that's a bit of a wanker. So I think that that's almost part of it. Conservation, I think, increasingly is coming around. The ship's really swinging around to understanding the slow and cumbersome ship of conservation, captained by 100-year-old white men with long grey beards, is finally going, oh, right, well, this is going to keep, people are going to keep eating the animals while they're hungry. Let's deal with that.
Straight up. And it's not going to change. In fact, when I was in Malawi, I witnessed it firsthand when I climbed Mount Mulunji. It was actually the first mountain I ever climbed. And, going there, I realized that they were basically cutting down all the trees. And I thought to myself, what is going on? Why are all these trees being cut down? And what happened was, Malawi is going through one of the largest droughts in Africa. And I think they were ranked the poorest country in the world by the World Bank at one point. They might still be. Now, with poverty and the drought, the combination of the two leads them to do desperate things, and that means cutting down the very last tree that they have, which is to me very sad. But they needed to cut down those trees because they needed to use that wood for fire so that they can burn this maize food that I think was given to them by the West. It's the only single food that could have been I think grown cheaply and abundantly in such harsh conditions. And so in order to make this food, you have to cook it, and it takes a while to cook. And so they need more wood fire. So it exasperates the situation. It makes it even worse. And then we say to ourselves, why are they doing that? That's so bad. That's an isolated situation. But it's not. It's the West that caused, the quickness of the drought. Droughts happen all around the world.
How could they be so stupid?
Yeah.
It's so as well. First of all, we denied, we pointing the finger this way here, denied them an education for starters. And then even without that taking place, this is the option that was given to them.
Yeah.
And that is it. Here's the food. It requires cooking. We've given food that requires cooking to people without electricity or gas.
That's it. Yeah.
What do you think's going to happen? Now let's talk about who's stupid.
Yeah. There are a lot of NGOs that have that kind of thinking.
Yeah.
They're looking at one component of it, and NGOs, I think they mean well, but they compartmentalize nature and humanity. And when you compartmentalize these things, when you look at it from a reductionist kind of point of view, what you're doing is you're trying to look at the single point of cause. And when you're looking at the single point of cause, that's impossible in nature, because there are so many unknowns and so many chances that could happen that could change the variability of the outcomes of whatever could possibly happen. If you give someone here's some rice without understanding the full picture, the full spectrum of what the possibilities are, then anything could possibly happen in the worst possible way. I think the first aid, they started dropping rice down in southern Sudan. One of my close friends, he's from there. He was saying that he's coming from farmers, right? Like his whole lineage was farming, and all of a sudden, world first aid or something like that. They started dropping rice down these airplanes, and they kept doing that for years and years. But what they failed to do is what you just said is, what about creating technology to help agriculture in areas where it's hard to grow agriculture, using solar panels to irrigate water into crops and things like that. But they just kept dropping the rice, and what happened was that entire tribe lost their purpose. They lost their drive to even continue basically doing their mundane basic things, which is to become farmland herders. Yeah. That was their purpose. That was their drive. And now a lot of those men end up going into civil war, joining rebel tribes, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, and it's that road to hell being paved with good intentions.
Yeah.
I think that's wording pretty much like that. And again, he said the NGOs are well-meaning, but they don't seem to learn from the lessons of the others. Many years ago, I met the head of USA to Africa, took him on safari, and he said that the ambition was for 10% of the aid to get to the intended recipients. That's what they considered that was doing well.
Oh.
And there's just so much pilfering along the way. There's corruption they've got to deal with, which they have to deal with to get it through those end. And 10% is considered enough. And here's the thing.
Jeez.
This seems remarkably inefficient.
Right.
It's not the world that I'm involved in. But coming on to corruption and back to Malawi, and Malawi is known as the warm heart of Africa, incredibly, famously friendly people.
Yeah.
And in fact, in all my travels around the world, perhaps the only people that could match them were the Syrians. So not a place you want to go now. But you had an experience a bit the opposite, where you'd given up walking for a bit, probably sensibly, giving your knees a break, and you were kayaking Lake Malawi. And for people that don't know, some people call it the annual or the year lake because it's 365 miles long, or is it kilometers?
Something. Yeah, miles.
But 365 miles north-south, 52 at its widest point, and they come up with saying 7 deep, I think, at its deepest point. So it's the fourth biggest lake in the world. You were going to kayak the whole thing, pulled up at a beach, and what happened?
I was welcomed by hundreds of people, local fishermen, children, women in the distance. And it was just almost, it felt like a welcome party. As you know, I kind of rode into it as if like I've always done, which is just get in and just like hold your breath essentially, because you're gonna go, you don't know what's gonna happen. You don't know if these people are gonna have some kind of superstition over a strange black man coming on a kayak to their land who doesn't speak the language. But I do know that there will be, like 100% all the time, there will be curiosity. I just don't know how that curiosity will blossom into. And so this one here, eventually the chief came. He was introduced to me by a translator. There was only one guy who spoke English in the entire village. He happened to be really drunk, and so he was wasted. And this guy comes out to me. He's like, "I want to introduce you to the chief." And I'm like, "Oh boy, this is not going to be good." I knew from the onset that this is not going to be a good situation here. But I had to do it anyways because it was already nighttime, and the water was pretty bad, and I couldn't find on the map anywhere where there was like a safe place to land. Since the night before that, I was sleeping with hippos, so I didn't want to push my luck any more than that.
Yeah.
So the chief didn't believe who I was, but it wasn't told to me by the translator. Since he was drunk, he said, "No, it's okay, it's fine. You sleep here." So I slept behind this restaurant, which is like this kind of like this like beaten down shack with, we were talking like brown, like dark, beautiful, that red soil in Africa. And so I pitched my tent in the back of that restaurant. And about a few hours later, it was like 2 a.m. at night now, 2 police officers show up with AK-47s, and they shine the light through my tent, and they're like, open the tent. And they're just pointing the AK-47s into my tent. Like I just got out of a really, bad dream. And then you wake up to an even worse reality. Like that's
back to the dream. Yeah.
Yeah. I want to go back to the nightmare, please. That's when you're in a really bad place. And they said you're under arrest, and I was like, under what grounds? And I think because I was being so smart, I was kind of like being smart back to the police officer. He felt it as like an insult or degrading his masculinity or something like that. So he started to like say, "Well, you're under arrest for kayaking in the lake." And I was like, "It's definitely not illegal. I can kayak on the lake." I know 100% that you're lying about this. And then he said, and then he started to look around and he's like, oh, well, you're under arrest for not wearing a life vest. And I'm like, what? This is like, my life vest is right here in front of you. You can see it. And then as soon as I said that, actually, I realized what was going on, you know, because I knew he saw the life vest. And this is, we're talking like this police officer, like, you know, dark skin, he had a big pot belly, you know, had a very lazy demeanor about him. And you could tell that he just like takes advantage of people and he's a bully. You could just tell straight off the bat. And you know, I showed him my passport and everything like that. And you know, he looked at the passport, he looked at me, he's like, no, my friend, you are not a European. You, my friend, are African. Look at my skin and look at your skin. Like that was his evidence of who I was by him rolling up his sleeve and showing his skin color matching with mine. And he's like, you, my friend, are African. You come with me now. So they handcuffed me. They put me in shackled handcuffs, you know, which means that you can't separate your elbows. And you're like basically in this position the whole time. They essentially like stole this bike from someone, you know, in the neighborhood, in the village. And they said, you know, give us this bike. And that's how we rode to the police station. And I remember it was nighttime at the beginning, and you know, they just threw me in there. There was no light, no nothing. You know, it was really hot, disgusting, smelled like it was just insanely disgusting. Like it smelled like feces, like pee and human sweat combined together. It was just the worst scenario ever. And I remember I was laying on top of a person's leg at one point. That's how crowded it was. And I couldn't see anything. Nobody could see anything. You know, and I was just like, this is pretty fucked up. I'm in a really bad situation right now. And, you know, next day goes around and I, you know, try to plead with this guy for the longest time. I'm like, hey, listen, I'm not a bad person, this and that. I'm pleading. They don't feed me any food. I was actually fed by the inmates who were in jail already. They gave me chips and water. They also had to help me like pee. So, you know, because I'm in shackled handcuffs, so I couldn't undo or put down my pants or anything like that. So yeah, it was bad. So they had to, essentially what they did was they held the bottle for me, and you know, I had to pee, and obviously I'm missing most of the time. And these incredibly nice, hospitable human beings didn't even care that was happening. I was just like, wow, that's like taking you to the most humble possible place that you could ever be, is when, you know, a complete stranger is holding a bottle for you to pee into, and you know, you're kind of pissing all over this guy's hand, and you know, they don't really say anything. They're just like, just humbled about it, and just say like, you know, you will do better next time. You know, and I didn't even speak the language. I didn't understand what language they were speaking. They were speaking Chichewa, and they didn't understand me. So it was just like such a weird kind of experience where, you know, with authority, with patriarchal authority, it's always going to be bad. No matter what, it's always going to be bad. I feel like patriarchal societies were very linear driven, we're very linear thinking, and therefore we don't think about the consequences too much of what our actions will entail. It's a very selfish gain. You know, more to that later, but you know, about a couple of days later, my buddy Francesco, who is this Italian white guy who decided to join me from Mozambique to Malawi, you know, he called me up one day and he said, hey, listen, I'm gonna walk with you along the length of Malawi while you kayak. And so he was always a few days behind me. And by the time he caught up with me in the village where I was jailed, you know, obviously everyone in the town knew. Apparently I was super popular at this time. It was like the biggest news. You know,
so how many days have you been in there?
Sorry?
How many days had you been in there?
A few days. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. And I took I took a lot of like meditative breaks, and like that was just me meditating, like just there was like one hole over the cell, and like that a bird would come through it all the time, and I remember like that was my biggest entertainment. It was really a great situation. But anyway, so Francesco finally arrives, and they tell him, they're like, "Oh, your friend is in jail," and he's thinking like, "Oh crap, that sounds about right," because he's known for me being picked up by police officers constantly. So he's just like, it wasn't a surprise for him. So he finally comes to the jail, and he tells the police officers, he's like, "Oh, hey, I heard you have my friend Mario," and they say like, "Yes, oh, he's your friend." So they just released me on his word for the fact that I am his friend. And so if you want to talk about racism, that is so many layers of racism that it's not even funny. We're talking about colonial racism, where the Black man has been put down for so many centuries that they don't even believe the own words of their own people. You have to have an authority who is white, and even though this guy he was a big fan, he was following me, they believed his word over mine. And that to me is generational and colonial racism, when you've created a group of people and you've made them ashamed of themselves, and they look at the white man as the savior. And of course, obviously, I have no problem with white people doing whatever it is that they're doing, so long as it's like you're not infringing upon the freedom of other people. And it's not like saying like current generations that are doing this to the masses, but it's definitely something that needs to be paid attention to by current generations, because it is the benefit came from past generations that basically transitioned this power of, like, for instance, people like Francesco to walk into a village in Africa and command anything and it be given to you. That is a privilege that needs to be squashed. That is a privilege that needs to be wiped out. And I think the reason we're not doing it at a mass scale is because it benefits a lot of people. And so why would people want to make a change?
I think it's also a hell of a lot of people just don't understand that that's the case still in Africa.
Absolutely. I think that the people that do understand, unfortunately, mostly are people who are, exploiting Africans when it comes to gold mining, looking for cobalt, exploitation of services, et cetera, and even NGOs, actually. They bring their experimental products or services to those parts, especially in Malawi, where they know that Malawians are not going to fight back. Malawians are going to gracefully just accept anything and everything.
Yeah. So, I mean, after that, you came back and you were able to regather your possessions from the chief, who confiscated them, it seems, on his personal behalf.
Yes. So what happened was I eventually went out of it with a fight. In fact, Francesco asked the police officers, "Have you fed Mario?" And the police officer said, "No, we did not know what kind of food he likes." That was the excuse they gave him. And I was like, "Oh, in fact, I thought you were going to give me caviar and sushi and whatnot." So we ended up going to the police headquarters in Malawi, and they ended up giving me an official apology letter and a phone number and contact, in which, if anything else were to occur, then to have them contact those people. So I was at least safe for half of my journey for the rest of Malawi. And that's where my string of arrests started to go away. And then I was escorted back into the village where my kayak was kept by the chief. And this guy, oh boy, he was the worst of the worst. Just going back to the memories of this, he I remember I saw my kayak immediately because my kayak is bigger than his house, longer than his house. It was like this mud home, right? And so living very traditionally, very proper traditional African village with mud homes and straw roofs. And he was living in there. And I remember like asking him through the translator, you must give me all my possessions. You must give me all my possessions back. And so this is like a very long, slow process that was just like cringing because I was like, I hope nothing's missing because I don't want to have to, you know, I don't want to have to call out the chief in front of this entire village that you stole something from me. So I was cringing the whole time. Luckily, everything was there. But I think the highlight of that event was the entire village was watching. You know, we're talking about, I think there must have been like nearly 1,000 people. And I have video to back that up too. And I remember that people were even like close to my face like this. They were just, you know, like just, whoa, what is this guy doing? And so they were watching my every move when I was putting my kayak together. And then I realized another thing there for a moment. I realized that like I definitely am inspiring a lot of young people here right now because I saw the look of awe in their faces. And the look of awe was the fact that, oh, this black man, who this foreign guy who happens to be black, which, you know, is unheard of for a lot of these people, is going on the kayak, and all he has is these little few things, and he's going from village to village to village. And they just learned that I was like kayaking the entire length of Lake Malawi. And so they were like really in awe. They were really inspired, especially at the very end when the chief, you know, approached me, tried to shake my hand. I refused it, and the entire village just kind of went like in awe, like just, whoa, like what, you know? And I think that's when, had I stayed longer in that village, I could have probably become chief.
Yeah,
not that I would want to, but you know, because it's more like a traditional thing. But anyway, so on my depart, they actually carried my kayak all the way to the lake. Like we're talking like, you know, I had like hundreds of kids, you know, carrying my kayak. Somewhere underneath the kayak, you know, they were like trying to like take turns of like who can carry it. They would even carry my backpack. They carried everything. It was incredible. It was such a surreal moment, like a moment of like, I don't even think we have movies like that. Like, I mean, it's just insane.
It sounds like the end scene of a movie.
That's what I'm saying, right? Like, it's just it was like that, but even possibly better. Because even the interaction, I remember that the drunk guy who translated, you know, I looked at him and I shook my head. I'm like, dude, you caused a lot of stress, man. But, you know, he shook my hand because I thought I had this anger inside me because of the chief and then also this translator. But then I realized that this guy just didn't know what he was doing because he looked at me, he smiled and he shook my hand and he's like, yes, you know, like trying to give me like support. Anyways, on the send off, when I was in the kayak in the water, I finally went off, and I had this beautiful video where I captured this moment, and this I almost teared up while I was in the kayak. But as I'm going off into the water, into the lake, the whole village just erupted and started screaming and just started like chanting, like it was just like screams and just like, yeah, you know, like it was just nuts. The noise, I've never experienced anything like that before in my life. Like I felt like I felt like Michael Jackson at a concert, and all of a sudden he just appeared on stage and just the people just erupted. Like it felt that energy was what I felt. And at that point I was just like, whoa, this is definitely I think where I'm gonna go in life, like just continue doing this stuff.
Okay, so then what's next? Are you going to do something during the pandemic? Are you busting out of cold Canada and hitting warmer climates, or are you going to do something locally?
A lot of the things that I do, I want to align it with, you know, sustainability and the awareness of environmental and social impacts that are happening around the world in terms of, I would say, really trying to focus the world and thinking of like, we need to become a unit together, and we need to become we need to close the gap between, okay, who are we as a people and how can we work together on this like monumental problem. And I think the trick really is like to change the culture, the mindset, the cultural mindset of global humanity. Right now, we only agree with one thing, which is like economic growth. Like everyone that you talk to, it doesn't matter if you're in a village or in a, you know, in a tribe, you know, money speaks. It doesn't matter where you are in the world. But what is it? What else can we like, you know, talk about that we can connect humanity together? And for me, you know, the climate crisis is it's not necessarily strong enough to bring us together yet, because not enough people are educated to understand what that is. You know, and so it's naive for us to think that, oh, like we should all connect because of climate change. This is a privileged kind of education that we get in very few places in the world. The majority of the world, they're not really concerned with climate change, you know.
Well, they're concerned with the effects. They just don't know what's driving it.
They don't understand what's driving it. You know, and all you have to do is like teach a couple of lessons and people can learn. Like we're all capable of learning. It's just more of like, does the government want us to, you know, are they invested? But the government themselves might not be educated enough in those fields, or might not feel that that's the most important thing. So I guess my drive really is like, how do I share that narrative to connect people and to have them care about these things? And for me, I do it through you know, these tough, rugged kind of expeditions that are in some of the most remote places in the world, and showcase how we can work together as a people. And I also want to show the kindness of people. So I do a lot of these things human powered, because that also requires a lot of social interaction. It shows you that people will try and help, that they will care. You know, even when I was kayaking the Great Lake in Ontario, here in Ontario, in Canada, you know, there were people who came off to me as initially quite standoffish, and I'm thinking like, oh, another racist, you know, situation. But I kept my authentic self, and I said like, hey, listen, man, I'm just doing this thing here. This is what I'm doing. And you know, sure enough, like this one guy who came up to me, he told me to get off his property. And I said, like, I'm kind of stranded. Like my kayak is a little bit, you know, it needs some fixing. There's some damages and whatnot. So can you give me like, you know, 15 minutes and I'll be off your property? And, you know, it's unfortunate as a Black person, you have to be super careful how you speak to, you know, sometimes white people in North America, even in South Africa too. You have to be careful how you speak to them, because if they feel like you have an authority over them, they feel threatened. And, you know, so the way you carry yourself actually dictates whether you're going to survive or not, which is really sad. Sad. It's really a sad experience for a lot of other Black people. Fortunately for me, I've gotten out of these situations. So 15 minutes later, his wife comes up, and she carries with her like, you know, two bread salamis that she made for me. She had a salad with some juice boxes, and you know, she took care of me. And I guess he was kind of feeling like, oh boy, like was I being bad? Like was I being racist? Like I don't understand. So it's really what I'm trying to do is showcase the genuine and the authentic side of humanity, and getting people to really understand what that looks like, instead of following what the news is always saying, that, oh, your enemy is around the corner. Your enemy is, you know, anyone that's outside of your home. But I found that to be the opposite case, because I've been to so many remote places around the world where people have been nothing but super kind to me, even the ones that were seemingly racist. It's more about getting to them on a human level, and how do we do that? Get people on to understand each other. So that question I will try to continue to answer. So in terms of upcoming expeditions, I have an expedition that I'm working on called the Caicos Challenge, which is to traverse the entire length of Turks and Caicos Islands from one end to the other, going northbound, which is the same direction that the Lucayans, which are the indigenous people of the archipelago Bahama chain, which is what we're connected to. And they've been there. They've been living there for around 700 years. And as soon as Christopher Columbus came, 30 years later, they were extinct.
I read about that.
And the expedition ends where Christopher Columbus set where he landed and basically set a home for himself for a little bit. And that happens to also be the place where I was born. So this is a really this is an expedition that goes through the history, the culture, but also the you'll get to see the flora and fauna of the Turks and Caicos Islands. And people around the world will be able to join virtually by joining a leadership board on Strava. If you're ever into fitness, you'll understand that, you know, if you have a watch or heart rate monitor, you can connect. And so in real time, as I'm doing my expeditions, you can actually match it with yours in real time, and then, you know, have a leadership board of, okay, Mario did 30-kilometer run, you know, like, what does your run look like? You know, maybe you did a 60-kilometer run and you beat me. That'd be great. I want to see that kind of stuff. And when I'm doing my cycling part of it, then, you know, people can match me on the cycling part as well. And, so I'm trying to create.
When does this start? Because I'm in quarantine for another 8 days. I'm going to get arrested by Boris Johnson if I step outside. So how long have I got to get ready?
Well, okay. So if you're ready by April, then, you know, you should be good to go. So you've got a couple of months.
Yep.
But I'll definitely announce this on my social media to let everyone know and start joining. You can even, on the leadership board on Strava, you can even join me through my training programs and things like that as well. So that'll be out live for people to see when I'm doing that.
I'm one of those Strava geeks, so yeah, absolutely. I'm in for that. Well, this has been fantastic, and I've taken up a lot of your time, but I've greatly appreciated it. It's been very thought-provoking. Just reading up on what you're doing was thought-provoking in of itself, and then talking to you very much so as well, and fun as well. I like to finish on something positive with everything we do, and I'm kind of feeling bad about the Malawi story. It's a great story. What was the flip side? Apart from the guy helping you pee into a bottle, which is an incredible act of generosity, I agree. What was the most glorious moment of humanity or just of wonder that you had on this trip? And we'll finish off with that, so we finish on a good high note.
Well, the fact that, you know, that the entire community, they saw that the chief and the police officer were bad people. And what I took away from that moment was that they sided with good, with just an innocent guy who was just going around kayaking as a sporting event. And, you know, that the fact that the entire village, particularly the youth, decided to take my side instead of the chief's side. I think that was, to me, very encouraging. And that shows also potential that, you know, Malawians do want good for others and themselves as well. And I think we need to give them the opportunity to you know, lead their country in the way that Malawians are, I think, at heart, good people. They need a good leader.
Yeah. That's a whole other conversation about good people, bad leaders, which maybe we'll do at some other time. I'd love to learn more about Turks and Caicos. I really would, but I've taken up a lot of your time today. Sincerest thanks, and can't wait to follow you when you start off in April and everything after that as well. If people are looking to read or learn more about what you've undertaken so far, if there's any charitable work you'd like to support, what should they read up on?
Definitely go to my website that has full details of everything that I do and what I'm up to. It's www.mariorigby.com. And if you want to like see really cool pictures and like short stories and whatnot, I'd definitely go to Instagram or Facebook, which is also Mario Rigby, just at Mario Rigby. And when I announce my expedition coming up in April, I think soon after I'll also announce the charitable organizations that I'll be involved with there and then.
Right.
So each expedition, I like to attach it to a charity that has to do with the place that I'm at in the moment. So this will definitely be a charity in Turks and Caicos that I know would definitely be appreciative of everyone's contribution to it.
Great. All right. Listen, thank you very much, Mario. And I think you're doing fantastic work, and we need a few more Mario Rigbys out there.
Thank you so much, Peter. Really appreciate this. This was a great talk. I appreciate that a lot.
Thanks, son.